Wagwan everybody, the mini-series about the gang relations in GTA turned out to be a good idea. That's why today we take undoubtedly the most advanced game of the 3D universe. And I'm not talking about GTA Advanced, because as opposed to what the title would suggest, it's not really too advanced, you know. We can't say the same about San Andreas though, and the gangs aspect to this game is no different. In fact, in contrast to GTA 3 and GTA Vice City, this game is actually revolving around gangs a lot. After all, the main character is mostly an active member of Grove Street families. Whilst in GTA 3 and GTA VC, there were gangs, but we were more of freelancers, and apart from Tommy being a member of the Forellis for like the 3 first missions, we did not care about any gang a lot. It was hard to even find out anything more, let alone build some bond with Vassetti's gang, because the story did not show us much about it. In the previous episodes, we more or less stuck to the chronological order, but in this game, the gang relations are so complex and some beefs and alliances literally span across the entire story, so we'll be jumping all over the place story-wise. Also, I'm sorry if some of the threads are going to be described multiple times, but that's for the people who only need to watch selected chapters, so they can still get all the info they need. However, I'll try to abstract each time the thread is described multiple times to make this watchable for everyone. Now, let's go to the first gang relation, the one on which the whole game story revolves around. The families, Ballas, Vagos, Russians, and San Fierro Rifa alliance. Now I know it's a lot of gangs for an alliance and it seems weird at first, but that's what actually is going on in the game. First, as usually in this series, I'm going to point out the most important facts about each gang. Usually though, it takes just a maximum of 2 sentences, but this time it took way more. So if you're already familiar with the basic info about each of the gangs of this alliance and don't want to listen to it again, you can skip to the timestamp displayed on the screen right now, to the moment when we actually discuss the beef and not just the participating gangs. The families were an African American street gang based in Los Santos. Their flag color was green, and they were split into 3 sets that during the event of the game were mostly beefing, which also will be covered in this video. Those sets were the Grove Street families, the Temple Drive families, and the Seville Boulevard families. However, it's difficult to determine whether all the sets took part in the alliance, but we'll get to that in a while. The leader of the Grove Street set was initially Sweet, and later it was Big Smoke. Or at least that's my interpretation of the event in the game, because it's not directly stated anywhere. And then it was Sweet again at the end of the story. The leaders of the other 2 sets are unknown. The Ballas were also an African American gang based in Los Santos and long-time rivals are the families. Their flag color was purple. The Ballas were also split into sets, this time into 4. Those were Front Yard Ballas, Kilo Tray Ballas, Rolling Heights Ballas, and Temple Drive Ballas. However, as opposed to the family set, the division into sets in the Ballas case is mostly irrelevant to the story, and I don't think you need to know them in order to understand the story well. By accounting for this division, I would unnecessarily complicate everything, which is obviously not good. So I'll generalize it all to just Ballas. The leader of the Front Yard Ballas was most likely Kane, or at least until the mission Los Sepulchres in which he got killed. But the leaders of the other sets are unknown. The Vagos were a Hispanic street gang, which was split to sets only in the HD universe, but not as far as San Andreas is concerned. The Vagos flag color was yellow. The leader of the Vagos is also never revealed. Then we got the Russian Mafia, about which we know about as much as that they sold guns and that their main base of operation, or maybe a business front, is the Atrium building in downtown Los Santos. And finally, San Fierro Rifa was another Hispanic gang operating in San Fierro.
No shit!
And T-Bone Mendez seemed to be their leader, and their dominant color was blue. Now to the real deal. What was this alliance even about? Well, despite that the total of 5 gangs were described in the chapter name, this alliance initially involved just 2 of them, the Ballas and the families. The concept was initiated by a corrupted Crash Police Unit member, Frank Tenpenny. His plan assumed uniting the 2 strongest street gangs of LS, the Ballas and the families. The motivation for the gangs to forget forget about their long-lasting rivalry was meant to be enormous money they would earn from dealing the new, very addictive high on the market, crack cocaine, which was to be supplied by the local syndicate. Together, they would form an unstoppable force, earning themselves a hell of a lot of paper. Tenpenny's plan would not only make him a lot of money, but also would make his job easier and Los Santos a seemingly better place. The two of the biggest gangs in the city would stop fighting and any other organization would be too weak to lay a glove on them combined. Seemingly because as much as there would be less shootout and gang violence going on, the increase of crack distribution in the city would in turn increase the number of drug addicts, which could arguably pose an even bigger issue. But why would a peacekeeper like Tenpenny care about it, right? Well, he didn't. But the leader of the GSF, Sweet, now he showed it, and that was a big issue for Tenpenny. See, Sweet saw that crack is already having a very destructive effect on the city's population, but especially on his community, on his people. Take Big Bear for example, an OG turned crack fiend. Sweet knew that if he entered the crack business, he would contribute to destroying the lives of many people, and mainly that there are going to be more people like Big Bear. So he was definitely against it, and approaching him with such a proposition like Tenpenny had would be completely futile. That's why instead, Tenpenny reached out to Smoke, who was already working with Crash for a long time, as suggested by the following dialogue.
I can't believe that nigga Smoke turned on me.
Smoke? Smoke does exactly what he's told. He learned that lesson a long time ago.
Tenpenny knew that Smoke was a highly ranked member of the GSF and that he was less stick to our principles kind of guy, and that he cared less about the lives of other people as long as he can make it right for himself. Therefore, Tenpenny asked Smoke to kill Sweet, take over the Grove Street families and make him sell drugs with the Ballas. While Smoke was very incompetently trying to either kill or convince Sweet to enter in the crack market during the Los Santos section of the game, Tenpenny was taking care of the competition in the shape of, interestingly enough, the Russians and the Vagos. Eventually, Sweet was captured by the police and sent to prison for life, which was the result of Smoke leaking vulnerable info to the Ballas, who ambushed Sweet. Smoke finally took over and involved the families in Tenpenny's operation. Now it's difficult to tell whether all the sets were involved or what was the position of the family's gang in the city after that event, because following the mission Green Saber, in which Sweet got caught by the feds, on paper the families, all three sets, lose every single territory. They literally cannot be found on the streets of Los Santos. It's not that they've been completely wiped out, it would be ridiculous to think so. I'm sure you remember the side missions for Caesar, in which our task is to intercept the money being delivered by the couriers to Big Smoke. Those couriers are the members of the families. Additionally, after CJ returned to Grove Street with Sweet much later in the story, we can see that the gang members was still there, so they defo did not just disappear. My personal theory is that some of the members of the families, and I'm talking about all three sets right now, either followed Big Smoke and started working with the Ballas and selling crack and that, and the examples of those we see in those courier missions, some other were probably integrated into the Ballas gang, similarly to the guy we kill in the Doberman mission, and some other probably killed or went into hiding. So the gang was operational but very weak and functioning in the shadows, shall we say. But officially they were partnering with the Ballas. CJ fully found out about this partnership in the mission photo opportunity, in which he was a witness of the meeting between the local syndicate and the representatives of the families and the Ballas. After some time, CJ managed to kill two of the members of the local syndicate and kill Ryder, one of the OGs of the families. Later, he also went on and finished off the supplier of the Ballas and the families by destroying the syndicate's crack factory. This, however, was not an issue for the two organizations, as Smoke already managed to build himself insurance in the shape of his own crack factory. So the operation was still going despite the syndicate being wiped out. Since that point, CJ began to care a lot less about his former gang being in league with the Ballas and about Smoke betraying him. So then we got a long drought when it comes to any mentions or actions concerning this alliance. The next moment worth talking about is Sweet getting out of jail thanks to CJ's work for Mike Torino. The return of the Johnson brothers was a great opportunity for the loyal GSF survivors to come out of hiding or to stop working for Smoke. Sweet managed to put GSF back on the map, and it seemed as if the families were no longer significantly involved in this alliance, apart from some people like OG Loke, whose manager was Smoke, or Beat Up, who was selling crack for him. Soon, CJ and Sweet managed to take over a very significant amount of territory in the city and attempted to kill Big Smoke and end his crack business. It's only in the last mission that we find out that Smoke has also involved the Vagos, the Russians, and the San Fierro Rifa in his operation, with the last one having been involved indirectly before because local syndicate used the Reefers as soldiers or for minor jobs. We can tell that those gangs were involved because we can find them working at and guarding Big Smoke's crack palace. CJ eventually killed Big Smoke and his factory was destroyed by an explosion, therefore ending this whole alliance. Grove Street families versus Ballas. Probably the most obvious and the biggest beef in the game. It was going on for long before the events of San Andreas, but we don't know many specifics about that. Only that the families used to be united and used to be a lot stronger than what we see in 1992 during the events of San Andreas. Their power fell mainly due to rejecting the opportunity to earn big money by selling crack cocaine, with which Ballas didn't have an issue. But it was also a result of Sweet's passiveness and unambitious approach. Anyway, the first thing worth talking about is in the introduction movie, where the Ballas were hired by Big Smoke to kill the leader of the families, Sweet, because he didn't want to get into a partnership with them due to his principles concerning the distribution of hard narcotics, which was to be the main part of this partnership. The attempt, since conducted incredibly unprofessionally, failed miserably. What's more, the Ballas accidentally killed the mother of Sweet, which only made things harder because CJ, the brother of the leader and a former member of the GSF, returned to the city. The Ballas tried to fix that issue soon by attempting to kill Carl at the funeral of his mother. Needless to say that they failed again. First because CJ has a plot armor, and second because the Ballas are incompetent morons, and I'd be surprised if they didn't fuck that up.
Everybody in the hood know Ballas are pussies.
This turned out to be a costly mistake, as in the following weeks, Carl's become a huge threat for the Ballas. Firstly, him and Sweet went to their turf to spray over their graffiti in order to show the Ballas that they don't fear them and that they won't give up without a fight. Sweet was truly irritated by the presence of crack in the city. That's why he sent Carl and Ryder to go and beat up some crack dealers of the Ballas in Idlewood, in hope to scare them off. The Ballas also soon made their move by attempting to raid Grove Street after they caught the 4 OGs of the GSF on a hangout. Fortunately for the Green Crew, the OGs managed to stop the Ballas from arriving at Grove Street and kill them in a drive-by shootout. This series of victories over the Ballas did not end, as Sweet, shortly after that incident, went along with Ryder, Big Smoke and his brother to perform another drive-by on the Balla turf, which also went very well for them, dealing even more damage to the Ballas. Sometime after that, Ryder and CJ got a drop on a secret government firearms transport being moved by a train, which was scheduled to make a stop in Jefferson. The two arrived at the spot, where it turned out that Tenpenny, the gang unit officer that gave him this info, informed 3 rival gangs about this delivery, so they can kill each other, which is easier than doing it in an intended fashion, so to collect valid evidence on the gangsters. Ryder along with CJ and other GSF soldiers managed to kill off the Ballas and the Vagos that also wanted to rob the train and successfully stole some guns off the shipment. The next thing we'll talk about is not in action, but merely a mention of the beef. It's in the mission Management Issues, in which Carl was asked by OG Loke to kill a rival rapper's manager, Scipio. Once CJ kidnapped him, he claimed that he's got contacts within the Ballas gang and threatened CJ that they'll exact revenge should Carl hurt him.
You Grove Street families? I know Ballas OGs. We like brothers. They'll f*** you up so bad.
Soon, the Ballas seemed to have enough of GSF's attacks, so they decided to raid Grove Street with all they got. While Loc were holding a party at the heart of the GSF, the Ballas sent dozens of armed soldiers to take over Grove Street to put an end to their recent surge of confidence. The whole action had an opposite effect though, as yet again, CJ, Sweet and their soldiers mashed up every one of the Ballas assailants and remained in control of the iconic cul-de-sac. Now something that can be interpreted in different ways. See, in the mission Great Imports, CJ got a lowdown from Tenpenny on a meeting in which the Russians negotiated the terms of a deal with the Ballas who wanted to buy weapons from the Russians. Carl interrupted that meeting and killed the Russian representative. On one hand, CJ belongs to the GSF and he does mess up Ballas' business in this mission. On the other though, he was doing it indirectly, not for his gang but more for Tenpenny. But then Tenpenny gave Carl this info in order to retain the balance between the gangs, which was in this case beneficial for the Groves. So I'll leave the interpretation to you. Let me know in a comment how you see it. Not long after, Sweet found out that one of the GSF members hopped the fence and went dealing crack for the Ballas. CJ in retaliation took over Glen Park for the Grove and killed a traitor. Then Tenpenny delivered a heads up to Sweet about the date and the location of one of the Balla OGs, Little Weasel's funeral. Sweet figured that this is a perfect opportunity to deal Ballas a severe blow, since many important members, including Kane, the OG of the Front Yard set, were expected to show up at the funeral. Carl, Sweet and a pair of the GSF soldiers went to the Los Sepulchres cemetery in Vinewood, killed Kane and all the other Ballas at the funeral. Then, due to the betrayals of Big Smoke and Ryder, Sweet and Carl lost their authority in the Grove Street families to the advantage of the traitors. Sweet got locked up, Carl exiled from Los Santos, and the families, heavily weakened, lost all turf in Los Santos and got into business partnership with the Ballas, temporarily ending this feud. The beef continued only after Sweet was released from prison thanks to Carl's work for Mike Torino. By this point, the Ballas were dominating the streets of LS. CJ and Sweet gathered up people and took back Grove Street, Glen Park and Idlewood from the hands of the Ballas. They also battered up Beat Up, a former Grove OG who'd switched sides and was also working for the Ballas. Then a fully fledged bloody war took place in the streets of Los Santos. In the midst of the riot that engulfed the city, the GSF went on and took back a significant portion of LS territory from other gangs, including the Ballas. All this in the quest to find out where Big Smoke, their old friend who betrayed them, got in league with the Ballas and became a drug baron, is hiding, as well as to equal the chances once they're able to run up on him. The GSF managed to rebuild their gang so effectively that they ended up being a stronger organization than the Ballas, which was perfectly marked by CJ's raid on Big Smoke's crack palace, during which he killed dozens of Balla soldiers and killed Big Smoke himself. On that event, the story ended. However, the beef did not end, as a player is still able to conduct gang wars with the Ballas on the streets of LS. Grove Street families versus Vagos. The beef was first mentioned in a phone call from Sweet coming after the Big Smoke mission, in which he said that the Vagos took over some of the GSF territory during CJ's absence due to them being too busy with the internal disputes with other family sets.
Since you've been away, shit has changed around here. Grove Street families ain't big no more. Seville Boulevard families and Triple Drive families are beefing and split with the Grove. Now we so busy, set tripping, Ballas and Vagos have taken over. So watch yourself out there.
Sometime after, CJ and OG Loc, another family's member and a pseudo rapper, killed Freddy, a member of the Vagos, and his guards. It was revenge for Freddy apparently stealing Loc's rhymes. However, in reality, Loc did not want Freddy to spread the rumor that he was Loc's sugar daddy in jail. Then, Carl and Big Smoke killed 2 marijuana dealers of the Vagos. However, this also creates some ambiguity, as taking the whole story into consideration, we can conclude that Smoke done that on the orders of Crash, so not fully on the account of the Grove Street families. But on the other hand, well, it's still open fight between the gangs, so technically no reason to exclude it. A similar situation took place in the following mission, in which Crash gave Smoke info about a Vagos delegation heading for San Fierro in an unconventional form of transport in order to cut a deal with the San Fierro Rifa gang. Him and CJ went there and eliminated the Vagos before they left the county of Los Santos. Also, in one of the missions for Ryder, Tenpenny gave information to either the Vagos and the families about the same train filled with guns making a stop in Jefferson. Both gangs arrived at the spot and fought for the shipment. Eventually, the Groves won and claimed the guns for themselves. Another time, CJ, on the orders of Crash, burned down a Vagos gang house for the purpose of killing one of their drug dealers, who apparently posed a problem to Tenpenny. Now that was the last event of that beef before Smoke took over the families, and we don't know how the relation between those gangs changed after it. Sweet got locked up and Carl exiled from Los Santos. The beef resumed only after Sweet got out of jail and CJ returned to Los Santos. After a period of resurrecting their gang, we got the mission Los Desperados, in which CJ and a couple of the GSF soldiers helped the Aztecas to regain their main turf in El Corona from the hands of the Vagos, which turned out to be a very bloody encounter. The Vagos also lost some of their territory during the riot. The families were making a comeback after the Johnson brothers had returned, and that included multiple gang wars on the streets of Ballas that also affected the Vagos. The beef was concluded story-wise by the death of Big Smoke at the hands of Carl Johnson, with whom Vagos were working, as evidenced by their presence in his crack palace in the last mission. Grove Street families versus Aztecas. Varrios Los Aztecas were a Mexican gang holding their turf in El Corona with a flag color of light blue. Cesar Villalpando was their leader. In the mission Big Smoke, Sweet mentions in a conversation with his sister that the GSF and the Aztecas are beefing and that he doesn't respect their lifestyle.
Get out my face, I'm going to see Caesar.
The hell you are, girl? You ain't messing with them essays. You know we beefing. They ain't nothing but a bunch of lowlife.
Despite the leader of the Aztecas being in a relationship with the sister of the GSF leader, the animosity between those factions was confirmed in Cesar Villalpando mission, in which Jose, seemingly one of the highly ranked members of the Aztecas, doesn't like the presence of CJ at their lowrider competition. However, the fact that most of the Aztecas at the meet had nothing against CJ's participation in the competition, as well as the friendship of Cesar and CJ that had its beginning in that mission, speaks against this. So the animosity was there, but it weren't too strong. The Green Saber was a turning point here, as the GSF, as we discussed earlier, changed its culture a bit, shall we say. The foregoing leader got incarcerated and Big Smoke took over. The Aztecas, since they were also heavily against crack, now became competition for the Groves, who got into crack business with the Ballas. Cesar Villalpando takes action against that, informing CJ of Big Smoke's betrayal of him and his brother. Then, after the body harvest mission, Cesar called CJ and told him that his OGs are being persecuted by rival gangs and that his gang is falling apart. Granted, Cesar does not directly mention the GSF, but I think it's far from wild to say that the Groves also took part in the persecution of Aztecas gangsters.
The Varrios Los Aztecas, it's all over. Trust, respect, honor, they don't mean jack in Los Santos now. My OGs, my S's, all dead or in hiding, eh?
Obviously at this point, the friendship of Cesar and Carl does not count, as they both were exiled from the city and it'd be difficult to call their friendship a gang relation. Grove Street families and Aztecas alliance. We have already discussed the beef between those two gangs, but they actually also were collaborating during certain stages of the story. The first example of that is when Cesar Villalpando, the leader of the Aztecas, defends CJ, the GSF's leader's brother, from one of his angry friends who didn't like him. It was important for Cesar to stay on good terms with the Groves, as he loved their leader's sister, Kendall, and was in a relationship with her. Additionally, after CJ returned to LS, having built a strong friendship with Cesar during the time they were both exiled from the city, the GSF, led by Carl, helped the Aztecas regain their territory in El Corona, which had been taken over by the Vagos following the betrayal of Big Smoke. On a side note, for some reason the Aztecas are hostile to CJ even after the end of the story, which obviously doesn't make sense. Grove Street families versus Temple Drive families. As was mentioned in one of the previous chapters, the family sets were beefing in 1992. It was literally every motherfucker for himself. In every combination, it was bad. One of those combinations was GSF versus TDF. However, this beef plays a very minor role in the story and is only mentioned. There are no direct encounters between those sets in the game. The first time that it was mentioned is in the phone call following the completion of the mission Big Smoke, in which Sweet directly said that Temple Drive families are beefing with the Groves. In the Knives and AKs mission, Big Smoke mentioned it to us in a conversation, but gave no details on what was the cause of the beef.
Seville wrongs Temple. Temple wrongs Grove. Bad blood leads to bad blood.
However, my assumption is that they didn't like the person that Sweet became after losing 2 of his brothers, as suggested by cut dialogue with Big Bear.
Man, Grove Street families used to be tight, man. The little Brian got caught up, you ran off. Anyways, man, Sweet, he just became a hard man to be with, you know? Then we got bad blood with Seville Boulevard families, and they split from the Grove. Then Temple, hell, they went Lone Ranger too. Sweet, man, he did absolutely nothing. Next thing I knew, beat-ups, he making money. Grove Streets, they set tripping. Streets ain't no place to be, man, when every fool is trying to make a move.
The set actually wanted to reunite in the mission, reuniting the families, but the meeting was spoiled by the police, who found out about it, possibly from Big Smoke, who hoped that Sweet would get arrested in the process. The beef ended along with the demise of the TDF set itself, who lost their last turf off the green Seba and never returned, because even if we take Temple back from the Ballas after CJ's return to LS, the turf would be controlled by the Grove Street families, because that's the set that CJ represents, not the Temple Drive families. So they just kind of went away, or they en passant rejoined GSF after Sweet got out of jail. Grove Street families versus Seville Boulevard families. Very similar to the Grove's beef with Temple caused by Sweet's poor leadership after Brian's death, only that this one is more emphasized in the story. It's first mentioned by Sweet in his phone call to CJ after the mission Big Smoke, then mentioned by Smoke in the Knives and AKs mission.
Well, until we get that plug, we gotta deal with a cat that always been there for us.
Emmett, Seville Boulevard families. We ain't too close these days, but nonetheless, I'll take you to see him.
However, despite the bad blood between the sets, Emmett, a gun dealer and a member of the Seville Boulevard set, gave CJ and Smoke some guns and had a friendly approach to them, claiming full loyalty towards the Groves. This was not the case with every Seville member though, as not long after, Sweet was attacked at the Seville turf while spending time with his girl. He was however saved by his brother, who shot down a few Seville soldiers in the process. In contrast to that, in one of the missions for Ryder, in which we robbed some colonel's guns, Ryder got the info about that colonel from his homie LB, who also suggested Ryder that he stored the stolen goods at one of the garages at Playa del Seville, the heart of the SBF set. This indicates that LB could also be a member of the Sevilles, and yet he helped one of the OGs of the Groves, despite the beef. This same LB was also helping Loke in the mission Life's a Beach, or at least that was meant to be the case in the beta version, in which the garage where we delivered the sound system for Loke was meant to be a property of LB. The sets tried to reunite later in the story, but the meeting was interrupted by the feds, possibly due to Smoke's leak. And the beef was also mentioned in the cut dialogue by Big Bear in the Beat Down on Beat Up mission, where he sort of reveals the reason for the beef, pointing at Sweet. Seville Boulevard families versus Temple Drive families. Literally only one subtle mention of this beef in the game. We can find it in the Knives and AKs mission, in which Smoke said this.
Seville wrongs Temple. Temple wrongs Grove. Bad blood leads to bad blood.
The two sets tried to reunite later in the story, but the attempt was spoiled by the police, who interrupted the meeting between the representatives of the sets, possibly due to a leak from Big Smoke, who hoped that Sweet would get arrested by the feds. Grove Street families versus Russians. Now this beef went sort of unofficial for the whole story, and you'll see what I mean in a minute, or you won't. I may be chatting ish, well, Let me know in a comment. The first instance of this beef comes in the Just Business mission for Big Smoke. He told CJ that apparently the Russians are trying to expand their business and that it may be a good idea to deal him some damage by hitting their hangout at Atrium in downtown LS. So, you know, not let him become competition. However, knowing the whole story, we can tell that, sure, this was the actual objective of this raid, but it was not done by Smoke with the best intentions for the GSF in mind, but rather on the orders of Tenpenny, who, as we know, was planning to make a lot of money by selling crack with the Ballas at the time. And kicking out the Russians meant less potential competition in the city for him. However, the two people that went and kicked the Russians' asses were the two GSF OGs, Big Smoke and CJ. So technically, it's on the Grow family. Interestingly enough, the Russians seem to know Smoke, judging by their dialogue, but it's hard to tell where from.
Smoke, you make big mistake.
Then we got the Great Imports mission for Tenpenny, in which he asked us to go mash up the negotiations of a deal between the Ballas and the Russians, who were set to sell guns to GSF's sworn rivals. It was done presumably for the same purpose as in Just Business. It's actually quite interesting how the deal between Tenpenny and the Ballas worked. On one hand, they had a partnership plan that were meant to make him a lot of money, but on the other, Tenpenny sent CJ to up their business because them started dealing with their potential future competition. We know that the Ballas knew about Tenpenny's plan and were introduced to it, and they initially agreed, judging by the well-known cutscene in the introduction movie, portraying three Baller OGs chatting about that deal. Well, the way I see it is that maybe the Ballas, after the failed attempt to kill Sweet at the end of the introduction film, decided to resign from the deal with Tenpenny, because maybe they didn't trust and didn't want to work with the families, or they simply didn't need additional risk as they were doing well as it was. Perhaps they got irritated at the fact that Tenpenny wanted to put Smoke as the main face of the business instead of one of the Ballas, who after all were a stronger organization than the families at the time. This would mean that Tenpenny during the Los Santos section was forced to give Ballas a solid argument that this partnership is no trap and that it's worth it. Ballas eventually agreed, but only after they heard from Tenpenny that Smoke leaked the location of the growth meeting organized by Sweet, after which they would go in another gang war with the Ballas. I'm talking about the Mulholland car park meeting in the Green Saber mission. Let me know how you see it and whether my theory makes sense to you. In any case, back to the mission for Tenpenny. CJ went and did as he'd been told. Again, not directly on the account of his gang, but still. And finally, yet again, not a direct encounter between the GSF and the Russians from a purely political point of view, but in the mission end of the line, CJ shot his way through a few posses of the Russian mobsters while getting through one of the floors in Big Smoke's crack palace. Because as said in the first chapter, the Russians were also working for Big Smoke by the time of the final story mission. Ballas and Russians alliance. In the mission Great Imports, we find out that the Ballas were trying to cut a deal with the Russians. They wanted the Russians to become their firearms supplier. However, the deal never happened due to CJ, who, orchestrated by Tenpenny, killed everyone at the meeting between the two gangs, thereby ruining the chances of getting to an agreement. Vagos and San Fierro Rifa alliance. In the mission Wrong Side of the Tracks, we find out that the Vagos wanted to cut a deal with the San Fierro Rifa. The Vagos most likely wanted to buy crack off the Reefers. Since the Reefers had strong affiliations with the local syndicate, a crack supplier, they probably also had access to that narcotic. The deal never happened, as the Vago delegation was stopped by the two of the Grove Street family's OGs on the orders of Tenpenny, who wanted to eliminate anyone who'd pose competition for his future plan concerning the partnership with the local syndicate and crack distribution in LS. Ballas vs Aztecas. After the mission Body Harvest, Caesar informed Carl that the OGs and the members of the Varrios Los Aztecas gang are being persecuted in Los Santos. This was after the Ballas had taken over the city and after Smoke had betrayed Sweet and taken over the families. Therefore, the Aztecas became competition for them, and therefore they had to be wiped out. Granted, it's not directly said that it was the Ballas trying to hunt him down, but it seems quite obvious that they were undoubtedly one of the gangs giving the Hispanic gang a hard time at the time. But apart from that, there were no other direct encounters between those two gangs in the story. Red Gecko Tong versus the Nang Boys. The Red Gecko Tong was a Chinese criminal organization operating in the city of San Fierro, led by Forellis. Similarly to the families or the Ballas, it was split into a few subdivisions. The ones that we know existed are the Mountain Cloud Boys, run by Wutsi Mu, and the Blood Feather Triad, about which not a lot is known. Needless to say that their main turf was situated in Chinatown. The Da Nang Boys were a Vietnamese crime family operating mainly in Vietnam, but also had a small-time subdivision in San Fierro. In 1992, the Da Nang Boys had big plans to send more resources to San Fierro and build a strong position in the city's underworld. In order to do that, they had to first weaken the current players, which in this case was the San Fierro Triad. They first unceremoniously wiped out the Blood Feather Triad, quickly paying for it, as Woodsy, the leader of the other set of the Triad, Mountain Cloud Boys, with the help of the protagonist, arrived at the spot where the Feathers were attacked by the Vietnamese and exacted revenge on them. Later, the Vietnamese found out about a mysterious package that was to be delivered to Forellis, again the leader of the entire San Fierro Triad. After CJ was sent to collect it from the airport car park, the Vietnamese ambushed him there and attempted to destroy the delivery. They eventually failed, but they didn't give up just yet. Next, they set themselves as an objective to assassinate Forellis. Hence, they delegated 2 men to keep constant watch over Woodsy's betting shop, where Forellis was currently staying. Carl, however, came up with an idea that he's going to pretend as if he's transporting Mr. Forellis out to the country in order to lure the Vietnamese away from the Woodsy's flat, and then the Triad boss can safely leave shortly after. The plan worked and Forellis was saved. Then it was time for Woodsy to make his move. He asked CJ again to sneak into a container ship on which the Vietnamese were holding their cargo, and it looked as if it was their sort of temporary base of operations, in order to plant a bug, so Woodsy can know when the delegation from Vietnam arrives to support the San Fierro division of the Da Nang Boys, which would make the Vietnamese gang hard to deal with from the Triad's perspective. CJ succeeded, killing many of the Da Nang soldiers in the process. And finally, Woodsy's plan worked, and he received the info that the Vietnamese delegation was just approaching San Fierro on another container ship. CJ immediately offered to help him deal with the situation, flew over the ship in a helicopter, from which CJ was spraying the Vietnamese gangsters with bullets, until the helicopter got shot down with a rocket. Then CJ sneaked onto the boat, got past dozens of Vietnamese soldiers, freed the refugees that the gangsters were holding on lockdown in one of the containers, only to then go on and win a sword fight with the Snakehead, a samurai or ninja looking guy who seemed to be the leader of perhaps not the entire Da Nang Boys, but at least the leader of the delegation that was sent to San Fierro. In any case, CJ's actions kept the Vietnamese at bay, quite literally I guess. What I mean is that the big plans of the Vietnamese were ruined, and the San Fierro subdivision has not received support from their home country after all, so the Triads could breathe a sigh of relief. Mountain Cloud Boys versus Grove Street Families, Ballas and San Fierro Rifa. Now I know that some of you may think that this must be some kind of mistake, because CJ was a good friend of Woodsy, so how could their gangs be at war, etc. But no, because remember that by the time CJ met Woodsy, he was not an official member of the GSF, or rather was a member of the old GSF, the one against drugs that was either exiled and hiding, wiped out, or they just joined the Ballas. Because the current GSF meant Big Smoke and base pushers. Anyway, in the mission Pair 69, CJ wanted to run up on the remaining local syndicate members, T-Bone Mendez and Mike Torino, who were meeting the Ballas and GSF delegation from Los Santos, led by Ryder. Woodsy decided to help Carl to mash up the meet and send some of his men to help him deal with his enemies. At least story-wise, because in reality they're constantly shooting at fixed spots and their shots are only programmed to deal damage to a player, so Rockstar literally put him there to make things difficult for us. But story-wise, well, it's a different story. So not only they were shooting at the Ballas and GSF delegation, but also fought with the San Fierro Rifa, which T-Bone got to also run protection for the meeting. But other than that, nothing significant or direct really happened in terms of the beef between those gangs and Woodsy's Triad. Sindaccos, Forellis and Lyon's alliance turned beef. All three gangs were Italian criminal organizations or mafia families operating in Liberty City. In 1992, the leader of the Sindaccos, the father of Johnny Sindacco, wanted to expand his business to Las Venturas by purchasing a share of a casino, Caligula's casino to be precise. Not only that, but he wanted to do it involving the two other Liberty mafia families, the Leons led by Salvatore Leon and the Forellis, possibly run by Marco Forelli. Initially, the Sindaccos simply wanted to take the money from the other families and invest it for them. However, Salvatore has smelled a deception in that. He did not trust the Sindaccos. He thought that they wanted to do everything for him just so they could lie to him about the profit, claiming more money for themselves than they should. That's why Salvatore agreed, but only if the deal assumed having a third party man who was not a member of any of the families and who was meant to run the casino, ensuring that the profits are split equally. And to be fair with you, personally, I don't really understand how someone looked at it and thought that it was gonna work. Especially that they'd taken a complete moron for this position in the shape of Ken Rosenberg, who actually weren't even neutral as he used to work for the Forellis, which Salvatore was fully aware of. But the main issue was that the three families simply hated each other, and a third party guy had no right to make things any better. Each family wanted to screw the others over. The Sindaccos, who can pretty much guarantee that initially wanted to have full control of the book so they can unfairly claim additional profits. The Forellis wanted to first kidnap Johnny Sindacco, either to get rid of him or to demand ransom or something like that, obviously in order to get advantage over them. And then Salvatore Leon took over the casino, which angered the Forellis, who tried to kill him. Salvatore found out about it somehow, perhaps from Ken, and sent the protagonist to stop the Forelli delegation from arriving at Las Venturas, which CJ carried out, and in quite a spectacular manner too. And then in turn, Salvatore, in reply to that, sent CJ to Liberty City to pull off a massacre at St. Mark's Bistro, Forelli's restaurant, and kill Marco Forelli, some capo, their boss, someone important that's for sure. So it turned into a civil war, and the Leons seemed to profit from it the most. Although not fully, because due to Johnny Sindacco not understanding quite basic business principles, had previously started a childish conflict with the Triads, which eventually led to a heist performed on the Mafia's casino, losing them bare money, so no one walked out of it without a scratch. Mountain Cloud Boys vs Sindaccos, Leons and Forellis. This whole beef was initiated by the Sindaccos, who didn't understand that the fact that Woodsy and his triad running a casino in the same city as they do is actually good for them. They simply followed the pattern competition equals bad and decided to make things hard for the triads. But not only did they adopt a wrong strategy, the execution of the strategy was also ish, because the best they were doing was smashing some deliveries of the Triads casino or managing to introduce fake chips into Full Dragons, which was, by the way, the discussed Triads casino. The only thing that those cheap moves could do is to anger the Cloud Boys rather than cause them any real damage. And so they did. Due to those irresponsible and insolent stunts of the Mafia, CJ, orchestrated by Woodsy, first scared the shit out of Johnny Sindacco, the son of the Don of the Sindaccos, and in exchange for the fake chips, Woodsy sent CJ to put Sindacco's plastic factory out of business by blowing up their machinery. Interestingly enough, it seems that not long after that, after Salvatore took over the casino, Ken Rosenberg, so the guy that was meant to be the neutral side of that pseudo partnership of the Mafia, mentions to CJ on the phone about some triad meeting.
It's war for control of Venturas, man. War! War! There's word of some triad visitors, something that should keep them busy. I'm calling from the bathroom. I gotta go. I really gotta go.
This suggests that Salvatore saw that the beef with the Chinese gang was not the greatest of things to be doing at the moment, so he tried to broker a truce. But later, it turned out that the Triad was still holding grudges to the Mafia for those stunts of the Sindaccos, and they prepared and conducted a spectacular robbery of the Mafia casino, putting the Leon Mafia in a terrible financial situation, because the Forellis and the Sindaccos were no longer a part of this deal, and actually they only got themselves to blame. Salvatore promised CJ and presumably the Triads revenge, however we don't know if that ever happened. Mountain Cloud Boys vs Vagos. After CJ saved the rapper Mad Dog from killing himself and became his manager, he and Dog wanted to return to his mansion at LS. However, it turned out that Dog's yard got taken over by some Vago drug dealers led by Big Poppa. This did not demotivate CJ and he wanted to take the mansion back. He asked Woozie for help, which he provided. CJ, along with the Mountain Cloud Boy soldiers, raided the mansion, wiped out every single yellow dress moron in there and chased down Big Poppa himself. And in this, kind of an indirect way, Woozie's triad and the Vagos turned their relationship from neutral to rather negative. But no further action was taken from neither side. Aztecas versus Vagos. Even though that I always considered in my head the Vagos and the Aztecas as the sworn rivals, almost like the families in the Ballas, turns out they only have one serious encounter in the game. But before that, there's one more thing worth mentioning. After that mission Gone Courting for Catalina, if we pick up a phone call from Catalina before starting the Maiden Heaven mission, the territories so far belonging to the Aztecas are being taken over by the Vagos. This is actually an oversight in my opinion. First of all, most players miss this phone call because they immediately start another mission for Catalina, which means that the territories remain under the control of the Aztecas, even though story-wise it should not be the case, and you'll see why that is in a minute. Besides, what does Catalina's phone call have to do with anything? It's just another typical phone call from Catalina in which she threatens us, calls us names, and typically what Catalina does. In my opinion, the developers must have accidentally put the change of the territories holder after the wrong phone call, because at the end of the Body Harvest mission, Caesar called CJ, saying that his OGs and the Aztecas as a whole got a proper offering going on at their neighborhood. It would make a lot of sense for the Vagos takeover to take place after this phone call. My theory is that initially, this phone call was meant to be just a usual phone call that we'd receive in free roam, and not right before the end of the Body Harvest mission, as it is in the final version, and the takeover was set to occur after this phone call. But then the developers for some reason changed the concept and decided to include this phone call in the mission. I think that the ID numbering or something in the code may have got mixed up because of the deletion of this phone call from the list, and the change was instead associated to the phone call that comes after that. However, this is also not 100% correct, because actually the first phone call after the one at the end of Body Harvest is the one from Caesar, this time telling us about the races. So let me know in a comment what's your theory on that. Going back to the beef, in the mission Los Desperados, which is after CJ and Caesar returned to LS, the Aztecas wanted their turf back. Therefore, Caesar, 3 of his OGs, along with CJ and a couple of the Grove soldiers, raided El Corona, wiped out all the Vagos and took it back for the Aztecas. And that's pretty much it really. And so we got to the end of this video, which is the longest one on my channel so far, and by far. It was a cool one to make, can't lie. I enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoyed it as well. If you did, I beg you to hit the like button and subscribe if you like watching videos on my channel in general. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the subject, and to stay in the gangs topic in San Andreas, here's the video in which we debunk the theory that Ryder's betrayal doesn't make sense and explained why it did make a lot of sense. Meanwhile, thank you for watching till the end, which in the case of this video means more than ever. Respect.